There's something strange in the woods of Maine. It's bipedal, walks upright like a human being, and is occasionally heard to mumble strange vocalizations far, far away from civilization. Even stranger still, the creature has an appetite for peanut butter and has been known to break into remote cabins to steal bread to complement its favorite snack. It's never harmed anyone, but local residents still live in terror of it. But that's no Bigfoot. It's fugitive Christopher Knight, who fled his home in Massachusetts in 1986 and spent almost 30 years living completely alone in the woods. The tale of the White Phantom, the North Pond Hermit, would only come to light in 2013. On a fateful night in April of 2013, Knight sneaks toward the site of a summer camp he's become accustomed to stealing from. He moves silent as a ghost, every square inch of his woods memorized after 27 years living in the wild. He's careful to step where he knows he'll leave no tracks, and as he slinks up to the sleeping summer camp, he's as silent as a ghost. He uses a screwdriver to force open the door of the camp's dining hall, knowing that he'd be able to score a few pounds of food from the freezer. The camp staff has taken to locking the freezer after his numerous raids over the year, but Knight had discovered a key to the padlock and stolen that on a previous raid. Now the missing food left campers scratching their heads, seemingly disappearing out of a still-locked freezer all on his own. This was something he'd been doing for years. Knight has the routine down pat and uses his expert woodsman skills to move completely unheard by the sleeping campers. But in the 27 years Knight had spent living in the wild, he'd failed to understand how technology had evolved. Completely unaware, Knight sets off a motion detector installed by Game Warden Sergeant Terry Hughes, who'd become obsessed with catching the Phantom Thief for years. Hughes sneaks down to the camp and calls the local sheriff's office for backup, then surprises Knight as he exits the camp dining hall, bag full of stolen goods and candies. Soon he was in handcuffs and in the back of a sheriff's vehicle, but still Knight refused to answer any questions. Finally, he began to speak, admitting that he remained silent at first out of shame for what he'd done. As he spoke, though, it became clear that it took effort, almost as if he was struggling to remember how to properly speak. This was, after all, only the third human interaction he'd had in almost 30 years. Months before this, a son and father duo had stumbled across his camp, and they had exchanged only a few words, with the two fishermen agreeing to keep quiet about the hermit, who simply wished to be left alone. Years before that, he'd come across a hiker and simply nodded and said hi. In 30 years, Christopher Knight had spoken less words with another human being than you use to order food in a restaurant. The officers asked Knight how long he'd been in the woods, but Knight was confused. He had long ago stopped keeping track of the passage of time, and he simply asked where the Chernobyl nuclear disaster had occurred. That was the year he had taken to living in the woods, 1986. Knight had never seen a cell phone, never heard of the internet, and blessedly had no clue what a Kardashian was. Seeking to avoid being discovered, Knight had set up a secret camp amongst some large boulders in a stand of trees, and then taken time to carefully camouflage the area. He went so far as to not light cooking fires, eating his food raw, or using a small propane stove when available, and slept during the day, moving about only at night. Living in the wild, however, was not easy for Knight, especially in the notorious Maine winters. In order to survive, Knight had committed something like 1,000 burglaries, breaking into homes and cabins, but he only did it when he was sure nobody was around, and he never stole anything of value. He only took food, propane tanks, clothing, and most importantly, books to read. Hundreds of them, which were his only companions during his lonely 3 decades alone. A background check showed that Knight had no previous criminal record, but he was the only suspect in something close to 1,000 burglaries reported over 27 years that he lived in the woods. He was arrested and transferred to a jail in the state capital, where he slept in a bed for the first time in almost 30 years. His arrest was quickly made public, drawing stunned disbelief from many in the local community. These people had been reporting strange events for decades, some turning to the paranormal for answers. Flashlights would mysteriously be missing their brand new batteries. Food disappeared from fridges, and brand new propane tanks on cooking grills would, at dawn, be replaced with old, empty tanks. Eventually, stories began to take shape and give the mysterious thief an identity: the North Pond Hermit. Hundreds of people had their own stories to tell, all reporting mysterious thefts or break-ins. Each story was largely the same. Nothing of real value was ever taken. Only cold weather clothing, batteries, food, occasionally tools. At a homeowners meeting in 2002, one man said when he was 10 years old, all his Halloween candy had been stolen. Many refused to believe that someone was actually committing these robberies, and even when Knight was captured, they refused to accept the story as true, but it was. Knight was charged with multiple counts of burglary, but ultimately was given only a 7-month sentence. He expressed deep regret over his stealing, but had found it a necessary evil in order to survive in one of the worst winter areas of the entire country. After his sentencing, even the prosecution agreed that a harsher sentence would have simply been cruel. While in prison, Knight's condition seemed to deteriorate. Out in the wild, he'd taken cold sponge baths and carefully groomed his hair in order to avoid suspicion if spotted by hikers or campers. But while in jail, he'd simply let his beard grow wild and unkempt. The noise of all the other inmates and general filthiness of the prison grated at Knight, who was used to unspoiled nature and complete solitude. He attempted to strike up conversations with other inmates, but he was so far behind in the times, he simply couldn't relate. Movies, books, TV shows, he had absolutely nothing in common. A man totally out of time, and it showed even in the way he spoke. One inmate said that he spoke like a book, and after that, Knight simply stopped speaking. During that time, Knight struck up a friendship with a reporter from GQ magazine, and the two exchanged frequent letters. In those letters, Knight revealed more details of his time spent in the woods, like how he tried to stockpile supplies for winter months in order to avoid leaving footprints in the snow for others to discover. He also spoke of the times he almost died, which were frequent during the bitterly cold Maine winters. In order to cope with not enough food or too much cold, he would turn to meditation. He also expressed deep regret over his many burglaries. Knight also talked about his survival strategies. In spring and summer, he'd do his best to fatten up, eating as many calories as possible and imbibing any alcohol he could steal. Much like a hungry bear, his goal was simply to fatten up for the hard winters, and he stepped up his burglaries from April to September. Once the snows began to fall, however, he holed up in his hidden campsite, determined not to leave and give away his presence with fresh boot prints. Winter in Maine can be tough, and there were many times he feared he'd die from starvation or cold. Meditation helped, as did his many stolen books, which helped keep his mind off the pain of an empty belly or the freezing cold. As soon as the birds returned, however, and their songs filled the woods, he knew that summer was on its way. After his imprisonment, Knight paid $2,000 in restitution to the victims that could be identified, many of them by Knight himself. He was also reunited with his family and secured a job working with one of his brothers. His two brothers had kept his mother's spirits alive ever since his disappearance from his Massachusetts home by telling her that he was likely out west somewhere, and never once hinted that he may be dead. When he originally disappeared, the desperate family hadn't reported him missing, but had hired a private investigator to try to find him. Knight, however, had driven his car up to the deep woods in Maine, then simply left it parked at the end of a trail with keys on the dash and walked into the forest. But why did Christopher Knight become a hermit for 27 years? When asked, he himself admitted that he didn't know. When he found his original campsite back in 1986, he said he simply felt like this was the first place where he felt at ease, and could give no more reason than that. Now go check out Russian Family Who Had Never Seen Another Human, or click this other video instead.